Yeah, let's jump into this conversation, man. I'm glad to have you, my big brother Aaron. And I identify you as a local grassroots historian, right? I guess we could talk about that academically too, because I know you did step on some toes, right, with some of your research and oral histories. I'll let you jump into introducing yourself and where you come from.
Like to make a quick shout out to all the listeners on your show, and I'm really glad to be here to share some knowledge on the subject here of the show. And again, I'm Aaron Tootoosis. I come from Poundmaker as well. Lived there right till until my early 20s, and then I took off and went on a powwow trail, and eventually got some education, and moved into southern Saskatchewan and had a couple careers, and just still doing my education thing, though, getting a master's, but in the meantime, just a lot of presenting, a lot of speaking, a lot of stuff like that. So the again my bio, I'm the worst at the bios, though, by the way. Like I literally have to have a PowerPoint just for my bio when I do presentations and stuff, because I'll just say my name and nothing about how I relate to the place where I'm from. But yeah, my parents are Eric and Diane Tootoosis. My father is the son of John Tootoosis, who is the son of John Tootoosis Senior, who is the son of Yellow Mud Blanket, Chief Poundmaker's older brother. So that's how we relate to the land. It even goes further than that. Before that was really before there was a pound maker, and my mother also she comes from the Muscatine Cree Nation, and we have roots out that way as well. Through my mother and the Crane family out there. So all Treaty Six.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, the positionality questions, you saw them on the production notes, but we haven't got a pretendian on radical narrative yet. And that's why we have those questions. So very clear identity of who you are, where you come from in context to your history, your familial history, and being here from Poundmaker. Yeah, I mention Poundmaker sometimes on episodes where I'm come from and like literally recording here right now, looking out the window. But tell our listeners about your relationship to the landscape, and, like, I remember you hunting as a kid, you're always out there hunting and, out on the land, the territory pretty well. So describe the features or what comes to mind when you think of our homeland here.
Poundmaker is a really special place. It's a For those that don't know, it's maybe about 7 by 8 miles, uh, just a small piece of land. But it was the whole purpose of Chief Poundmaker selecting this as a reserve was to preserve a lot of the special sites. A lot of sites here are sacred in nature. Also, you have one of the biggest land monuments around, the Cut Knife Hill, or the Cut Knife Lookout, or the Buffalo Lookout Hill, or whatever people want to refer it to. Referring to Cut Knife is actually the name of a Tsuut'ina chief that was killed here with all his companions that followed him. And before that, people that lived here were referred to as Kiskikomaniak, the ones that lived by the Cut Knife Creek. The Tsuut'ina chief's name and is better translated in English as and referred to as Broken Knife. But with settler, or well, you have white you know, guys that at that time historians published our history, said Cut Knife. And there's a town named Cut Knife, there's a creek named Cut Knife, and then there's a hill named Cut Knife, and then now there's also a battlefield named Cut Knife. So
Mhm.
all of these things, there's a lot of other sites that are really interesting here, and the hunting is really good. We have a lot of outfitters that operate off their on the reserve and attract a lot of American hunters here. We've always had a lot of big game, a lot of trophy animals. There's deer, there's elk, a lot of good trapping too. There's beaver, coyote, fox, rabbit. A lot of bird hunting as well. Geese, mallards. You name it. There's a lot of ducks and a lot of geese and but, some of the features of the land that I grew up, I'd hunt in the north and the south end of the reserves, and, I know the land like the back of my hand, and, I've always, hunted there. I was hunting there this past fall as well. I came across now we have a lot of moose even. I never had moose when I was younger, and, a lot of elk as well nowadays, and, those are recent, returnees of, I guess, post fur trade, they kind of all disappeared. And,
Yeah.
you notice a lot of the landscape as well that has changed due to the fur trade, right? There's a lot of waterways that dried up, a lot of,
Mhm.
those depended on the presence of beaver. And when beaver were wiped out, there's a lot of waterways dried up. So I grew up hunting, and I also learned the history of a lot of these places and a lot of the history of the battle that took place on May 2nd, 1885 as well.
Yeah, and we'll talk about May 2nd, but you highlighted something cool that I really want my listeners to take away from this episode is that, you're highlighting, one, that there is, like, a spiritual historical significance to this reserve, not all reserves, right? But there's also this narrative that exists out there that, reserves are discarded, are almost spoken less than, but in your positionality, you really positioned our landscape here really well, and I think that'll be, like, for some of our listeners, the first time they're hearing of the reserve be this land-based stronghold.
hmm And it's a really like I mentioned, being a special place. There's a lot of hills here, and even going back to previous occupation here from other indigenous nations, right? You have the presence of Shoshone, you have the presence of the Northern Arapaho. You have all of these sites here, like the TP rings, a lot of historical sites that way that left evidence behind, and are also considered sacred ground, right? Because those directly pertain to ceremonial events that took place, and
Yeah,
also the presence of uh, the stone medicine wheels, right? There's a couple of those here and there that a lot of people don't know where they are, but they exist. And I know where there are a few of them, and where there once was some that were broken up for tilling of the land and stuff like that. So again, a lot of sacred sites here. A lot of that sacredness was here generations and generations before the Poundmaker people were even here as well too, right? So, but
yeah,
the presence of ceremony and the connection of the land and all that, it's still taking place. Our ceremonies are still happening. Every year we try to maintain ceremony out on the land there, and all of that stuff still happens. A lot of medicines as well. A lot of animals and plants. A lot of people dismiss separate the two, right? Like just because of hunting and gathering, but they don't realize that medicine is food is medicine.
mhm,
There should be no separation between plant and animal, because we make very powerful medicines with combining animal and plant together, right? So a lot of things here to that people come for. There's a lot of alkali sloughs. And that in itself. A lot of people used to come here just for that, for medicines as well. So.
yeah. Yeah, I like it because, yeah, like this podcast, we really highlight settler colonialism and, what Canada is doing wrong or even stateside, being anti-colonial, anti-capitalist in general. And settlers don't have a relationship to this land. And you even highlighted how our landscape traditionally here really changed. Like it changed
Mhm.
with, obviously the fur trade, the decimation of the beaver, and then now with agriculture. What are your
Mhm,
thoughts on that? Like, I wanna ask your perspective because, yeah, we are basically an agribusiness central in Saskatchewan. That's an industry that's ongoing, and it's
mhm. Those are things that I've been monitoring over the years as well, right? The presence of agriculture in our land, and a lot of people don't know, like, I've heard it in town and in Cut Knife growing up, the coffee row, you'd have all the white farmers gathering in the local hangout. They have little hangouts here and there, and at that time, I walk in at lunchtime, and they're really complaining about our people, and, one of our, older relatives at that time got told, "Why don't you guys go back to your reserve and do something with your land? You guys are not doing anything with your land, and, you have all that land there, and you're not doing anything with it." And then, but then like, just out of their ignorance, we learn in university, or, on our through our own research, that, the implications of the Indian Act. A lot of people don't know that in 1918, the Indian Act was amended, and it really it took away. Well, in 1881 was when the permit system was implemented, and from 1881 to 1952, the impacts of that alone forbade our people from selling their own grain and their own beef, at market values, and just the freedom of that as well. They restricted it. And everybody had to get a permission to sell from the Indian agents. So a lot of those Indian agents were very bad people. You had the Indian agents that were pedophiles and rapists, and those are the kinds of people that they were left in charge of determining whether somebody can go and sell their grain or sell their beef. So it was almost impossible, because if you weren't good with the Indian agent, then he'd say no, and there's nothing you can do about it. And if you did sell, or do any trade or any form of exchange with anybody, you'd be fined and put in jail for whatever amount of time the Indian agent feels as well. That's the kind of power he had, and he also was, in 1881, was given the Northwest Mounted Police to enforce the Indian Act. So you have all of those, and then but by 1918, as I mentioned, the Indian Act was amended again to allow for the Superintendent General of Indian Affairs to appoint a white farmer or rancher on Indian Reserve land that isn't being farmed, and give them a 99-year lease. So a lot of our land was locked up since 1918 all the way up to 2018, right? 100 years. That's that's what they say is a lifetime, but for our people, that's several lifetimes, right? Because we have a low life expectancy, but again, 1918, they did that because there was hardly any farming that was taking place on reserve by Indians. So you did have some that maintained, that were able to survive by farming, but a lot of those farmers on reserve were used to feed the staff at Indian residential schools. So you did have a little demand there that needed to be filled, and they used maybe one or two families from the reserve to supply that demand. But again, it was for Indian residential schools. When it comes to agriculture, though, um, the land is being changed by it, and they've been monitoring that. There is the process of what is called well, it's a side effect of farming and the land, and it's called the desertification, right? Like there's portions of our land that was once the most fertile lands around that are now becoming desert, that are turning literally into sand, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So you have that's taking place because the natural biome of the soil is being disrupted by, tilling and tilling and tilling and tilling. Right? So that's the course, so that our land is being I guess disrupted and destroyed, literally destroyed. A lot of people don't know the history there too, that local history of Poundmaker, and how they've in the past former leaders used to monitor and restrict a lot of the farming practices that took place back in the day. On Poundmaker, they never allowed cotton to be planted on the soil because the damage that cotton leaves in the soil, and the damage that is almost irreversible after that, right? They never want they it did happen here before, and they had to rehabilitate some of that land, and they used sheep back then. So there's a lot of things like that, a lot of cool things that happen on Poundmaker in terms of history and the land and agriculture, but nowadays it's not, right?
Mhm.
They're leaving a lot of burning a lot of the plastic on the reserve that they store stuff in that's highly toxic, and then also leave their containers that in spring runoffs that
Mhm.
end up in the creek. And, then our creeks fill up with algae and also support no life for
Yeah.
fish or anything like that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I love the contrast because, yeah, we are from a reserve here and pushing back against those colonial narratives of this place being, like, predominantly negative. No, you highlighted a lot of positive, and at the same time, we're in this place where there is ongoing, like, agricultural issues and conversations taking place in the contemporary, soil degradation, very real. You highlighted, runoff into the creeks, the water system's very polluted. Pretty toxic landscape overall, but yeah, actively navigating that. And I guess I wanna give a shout out to your wife because, you're living down there, right? So let's speak to your territory down there, your wife's territory, your daughter's territory, give it a place in the conversation before we jump into, the topic.
yeah, for a good 18 years, I'm thankful for the Standing Buffalo Dakota Nation for welcoming us in, and allowing us to live there all those years. But just an update: we did move away almost 2 years ago, and we did purchase a house and stuff like that. We did the modernized thing, but we wanted to just try it out, see break into the housing market, I guess, and all
Mhm.
that. But again, yeah, those 18 years on the reserve there were really awesome, and got to learn the land there and their special sites, and to be part of that and have those experiences out on the land, and having a good place to hunt, like just to walk away through my big huge backyard there, and it was really something that to live there as well. It's a special place in itself as well.
Yeah. Yeah, like how you said the backyard, right? On res, we got big backyards,
Yeah.
even front yards, side yards.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of good animals there to hunt, and I'm very thankful that I was able to survive all of those years, especially commuting back and forth to school, to university, and for the both of us, and have making trying to make it on a student budgets, and then the deer and those animals were really are a special support, I guess, for that and that process, and in return, I wouldn't disrespect them by any way, by any means, right? They not only fed us, but they fed other families as well. And it wasn't just tight with the meat and
Yeah.
just kept it for ourselves. They still provided for the elders there, just like I learned growing up. Feeding the elders in Palmaker.
Yeah, I like it, and yeah, one of the reasons I wanted you on this podcast is one, again, like, identify you as, like, a continuation of the oral history, right? You know these stories, you've been here on the landscape, you grew up here, you ate the animals from here, even swam in the creek. No.
Yeah.
But, it's valid, like, it's a valid take, and I really wanna foster these grassroots perspective on my podcast. And we are gonna have a conversation around May 2nd, 1885, and for some of the Patreon members who subscribe to that, they kinda got a little write-up on what that was about. But for our listeners who are new to the conversation, why is this date so significant for Plains Cree people here on Palmaker? Well, not only Plains Cree people, but people here on Palmaker, and even those who are personally tied to this history here.
May 2nd, 1885 is a day, I guess, of it's almost like a rebirth date, if you want to call it that, where our people had such a big event happen that wasn't of our causing. You know what I mean? Like it's something that was we were attacked, right? And it was something that our people, I don't think they really had to in the past, have to defend themselves from this kind of attack that was now being brought on, that was coming, I guess, from a colonial white government and forces, right, and weaponry. It was something that was never used also here, right, because you had weapons that weren't utilized by Canadian troops in the past, and also British troops. Yeah, you had still the remnants of British forces here. Canadian Army never really took place until what, the 1860s, right? Like when Canada finally started taking steps to have an actual army. But again, that date though is something that our people had to really come to terms with their strengths, right? And also, at that time there were so many negatives then as well. But somehow they had to put that aside and come to terms with that. We gave our word that we accepted the terms of treaty, and we're not going to go against those because we not only gave our word to the Queen or the Crown, but we also gave our word to the Great Spirit, to God or the Creator, whatever we want to address the great super being as. But
Mhm.
that our ceremony was involved in making that agreement, so we weren't going to go back on those terms. So we're gonna stay on the reserve, and we're gonna defend ourselves from whatever they're gonna do.
Yeah. Yeah, valid, and I think that's the big conversation I think that a lot of people have is because well, I guess, like, the reflection they have is that, well, yeah, we were attacked. But the reality is, I was even talking to James Dashak about this, and I don't know if you would remember it, but he said that like Plains Crees were really well supplied in terms of munitions. That in the 1850s onward, like there could have been a resistance here that lasted multiple generations, like 80, 100-year resistances. But there was this very clear diplomatic project taking place at that time, 1870s onward, treaty making, things like that, where peace and diplomacy was the name of the game at that time, and it shows up on May 2nd, 1885, where there was this deliberate attack by, Canada, the settler state, to eradicate us, but we defended ourselves, right? We defended ourselves that day
Mhm,
and ultimately won. Like, we won Canada. We beat them,
mhm,
and then now it bugs me because it's kind of like this side marker in history. Not too many people acknowledge it or give it the context it deserves because 1, like, they came to kill us, and then 2, they didn't, and we're still here. So for me, it's like a big part of my, like, political and economic and social analysis of Canada, right, is I really keep them at arm's length because, yeah, they were literally shooting at us here on May 2nd, 1885. And I wanna ask you the account, like, so let's give an account here from the oral grassroots local perspective of what happened.
in order to tell the story properly, like you mentioned, Jim, well, James, but again, he goes by Jim to me anyway. I'm knowing him as a friend. What he said about us being well supplied with the ammunition, I guess, to lead resistance for years. It wasn't exactly true for our people.
Mm,
More so because, again, to tell a story properly, we have to go back to 1884. But I'm not going to drag the listeners into a long history, a year prior. But there was just an event that took place in 1884 where our people were at a Sundance there. There was this big, massive Sundance ceremony that was taking place. The count was at least 200 teepees, and this was the had the presence of big names back then. You had Little Pine, you had Big Bear, you had Poundmaker, the Old Man Sweetgrass, all of these big names that were all taking part in this. And there was a dispute that took place though with the farming agent or the farming instructor that was employed for the this little, I guess, Poundmaker and Little Pine. And this farming instructor was refusing to give out the rations or and all of that to these fasters or dancers that were participating in the Sundance. A part of their vow in giving up food and water and dancing through the Sundance for the 3 days there is that they have to put up a giveaway at the end, right? They give up a lot of stuff. So they promised a lot of the things that they were supposed to get, and they held it for them at the time to so that they can go get it. And they didn't want anybody to maybe possibly steal it. So they went to go get the cent for the things that they promised in their giveaway from the farming instructor, and then he said no and was refusing to give the stuff out. So a fight broke out, and the farming instructor got hit by an axe handle in the elbow, and you know was kind of bloody, I guess, from that, and called the police. And police got involved, and there was a little skirmish that took place where there was some fighting and shooting and stuff like that. Nobody got killed though, luckily, and it was actually Chief Poundmaker that actually grabbed the gun out of one of the the people, his own people's hands, before he was to kill the farming instructor at that time. It's kind of a real violent Sundance, I guess, but there was an agreement made with the police though that that they'd give up some of their guns at that time, and in doing so, nobody was arrested or put in jail. So there a lot of people gave up their guns that year before, and that left Poundmaker's people with really really old. They still had those flintlocks and bows and arrows, like very I guess rudimentary hunting supplies like that in terms of firepower. But again, fast forward again, you have the Saskatchewan Herald, that the newspaper for the province at that time, because Battleford was the capital of Saskatchewan, or the Northwest Territories, and it started putting out a lot of materials that were propaganda, really really painting Louis Riel as this really bad adversary to Canada again, um, since he did leave after the Red River Rebellion, and was pursued back by a few people to become the leader again of the Métis. And but even before all of that, the Saskatchewan Herald it's such a coincidence to look back and see the timing of these articles as they were going out, that you didn't even have Riel in the picture yet. Months after, the papers were already printing stories about him and saying he's going to do this and going to do that. But really, it wasn't until months after where he finally showed up and started doing stuff, right?
Mm.
So you have that, and but when it came to Poundmaker, it was in the month of April that you had a lot of stuff happening now, a lot of action occurring in terms of the Métis and what they were doing, right? And trying to establish Batoche as their their homeland, I guess. And the government of Canada was against that and wanted to settle the score and bring some sort of resolve. So of course they send army and police to come in, try to offer solutions in a diplomatic sense. You kind of wonder, like, why didn't they send politicians to do that, not people with guns, right? And that whose lives were based on military training or police training, and they weren't voiced and de-escalation or anything like that. And
Mm.
maybe that probably didn't even exist back then, but you had these people that showed up with guns, and what ended up happening was fight broke out, which led to a battle, right? And you had these events of the rebellion, Fish Creek, Duck Lake, you had the Tosh, you had all of these things, and then leading up to the days right before the action at Cut Knife Hill, you had the Frog Lake Massacre, right? And the presence and the media really spinning Big Bear's name out there, right? That making causing fear in a lot of people as well. And Poundmaker was known though too as well before that. He appeared also in the papers and was really trying to bring a just situation to the terms of treaty. And in doing, he was very vocal about it, and was always trying to speak to the politicians who would always refuse him. And the punishment for that was always having being stricken off the ration roll. Right? They take his name and his people off the list of being able to receive rations. And a lot of people think like, oh, that's just withholding food, but a lot of people don't know that that's at that time how hard things were. It was literally a death sentence for a lot of people. People starved to death when that would happen. And it really prevented a lot of the other leaders from doing the same, right? Because fear really ran things back then. Fear of the police, fear of the Indian agents, fear of all of that. You couldn't even do that because you couldn't even, complain there. You couldn't really voice your concerns that, hey, we have people that are dying here and we need more rations than what you're giving. You promised that our people wouldn't starve to death after treaty, but they are. And it was the year after treaty, after 1876, that the worst of starvation and the starving deaths took place. And you had other places like even after 1876, 1877, right at the place where Treaty 7 was made, you had in the papers in the Battleford in the Saskatchewan Herald, I mean, that they started referring to the place where 25 Blackfoot had starved to death, at the Blackfoot crossing. And you had articles like that appearing. And so there was a lot of hardship, but at the same time, our people were being, I guess, dragged into this Métis rebellion that our people, the Cree people, the Cree, Saulteaux, and Nakota nations here weren't really a part of. They're just separate events that were, I guess, not intended to be part of, are seen as part of the Riel's rebellion. And
Mhm.
so you had all these things taking place, and also the thing that took place at Frog Lake, right, with Big Bear, Wandering Spirit. A lot of people don't know, like, that was separate, right? It wasn't a part of a rebellion.
Yeah, you're really painting this picture of, like, the later in the 1800s being pretty tense times, starvation, decimation of the buffalo vibe going on. But again, like, this overlying and overarching conversation of peace and diplomacy. I always like, like for me, when I read history, and obviously you look at the US Indian Wars, America, very aggressive, big budget colonization. Canada had to be really refined. Like even today, Canada's really refined in their colonialism. Like they're not openly aggressive, they're subtly aggressive. And how you're painting this picture of, through the Saskatchewan Herald, this media campaign, it's almost like they're greasing the wheels of what they have planned in the future. And they have to do it in like subtle ways, like starvation policy, like passive aggressive policies, and then the Métis Rebellion, and then kind of grouping everyone up into that narrative and scaring these people in Ottawa who probably likely never seen an Indian, right? And sort of having these people decide these decisions that are gonna ultimately lay the groundwork of taking over the prairie.
It's exactly that. Canada, the reason for their subtleness is because that they had no money. They couldn't afford to do what the United States was doing to Indians down there. So Canada had to be very cheap, and were so cheap that starvation was actually part of the Indian Act. It was part of the policy that there's instances of a lot of people view liberals at the yeah as the savior for Indians. Like our people look like that, look at that, but in the time of the 1800s with Johnny MacDonald being prime minister at that time, the liberals were really just as I guess. bad or evil. They're criticizing Johnny McDonald's policies that you're basically in the House arguing that in the House of Commons arguing that your government's not doing enough. The Indians are still living, and then he's forced to say these quotes, famous quotes that circulate on the internet, like the ones that said we are doing everything that we can until but the Indians we have to get they have to prove they're starving before they get rations, right? He had the reduction and the reduction of rations, and he's defending his policy that they are doing all they can, and where the Indians now have to prove they're starving. I always ask in my presentations to all the non-indigenous crowd, they're like, how would you prove you're starving?
Yeah.
That's something like that's a question nobody really asks themselves or tries to come to a point of empathy on their people at that time. That we're starving to death out there. There's no buffalo, there's no medicine. Not only that, like the starvation, but also imagine the mental health of our people at that time.
Mhm.
1881, the amendments of the Indian Act back then started to go into the banning of ceremonies. And ceremonies are what kept our people healthy and well. And now even those were outlawed, and people would get arrested and jailed for holding those. So our practitioners, our spiritual practitioners back then would go to jail and unable to practice, and our people were no longer able to go to them for help. Right? So you can imagine that it was pretty bad. And of course, they didn't have psychologists back then, or counselors, right? And all that, and expecting us to manage and find a good place of mental clarity to come and be good people. It was almost impossible, but you think our people would have revolted a lot sooner rather than at a point of defense, right? But those are the conditions that our people were in at that time, leading up to the days here.
Like, when I find people explain this part of history from the grassroots perspective, it's almost like everyone has a different view of, like, this center thing, this history that happened in the middle, and we all have these different views of it just because of the family systems, starvation, displacement, mobilized, especially even post 1885. Like, a lot of, narratives kinda went underground. People didn't really talk about things because we were being labeled as, rebel Indians or dissidents and things like that. So, like, this time frame in my mind of like, I always just generally say 1850s onward to, like, 1900s is kinda like I wouldn't say confusing because I know people out there know their histories, like, especially people up even inside a lake now with Wandering Spirit coming forward and families in Northern Saskatchewan letting their family histories come out. But I feel like it is, like, something that it's almost like a Swiss cheese. There's a little bit of holes in the stories for some family systems and people, but the context of the conversation is, yeah, 1880s, after 1876, up leading up to May 2nd, 1885 was a very, like, traumatic time. Like, it would have been viewed as, like, even from the context of intergenerational trauma, like starvation years, right? There's very real changes. What came up for me when you were highlighting the story, like, the Indian agent couldn't comprehend our concept of the giveaway, right? So he was withholding these things, saying, "Why are you guys gonna take these things and give them to somebody else? Like, it doesn't make sense to me." So we're even seeing, like, these paradigm clashes that are basically laying this groundwork for conflict.
And it's always that where the white way is better, and question everything the Indian does, right? That
Yeah.
it's not right. You need to be taught how to live. But it's really funny though when you think about it. Like all white people that are here and then generations back don't realize that their ancestors were actually taught how to live here by our people, right? They couldn't live here,
Mm,
and they didn't know how to live here because the weather, the climate, the environment, the threats of environment, the predators, all of these things were so different than from where they came from,
mhm,
and they couldn't. There was no absolute way they could live here unless they were taught how, right? And they don't think about that our people were gracious enough and also we're not so greedy. We weren't stingy people. We were never stingy. Even through these times, even through these huge traumatic times that we highlighted here, and at the same time are still, at the brink of starvation, but at the same time so into their culture, so into their spirituality that they're still gonna vow to give away everything that could have helped them at that time, right? Not starve to death even. So
Mhm.
a giveaway at that time, promising rations was literally putting yourself at the risk of death, right? Of starving to death as well. But at the same time, you don't care because in our way, in our spirituality, that you have to give to receive, right? And I'm sure a lot of those people were and generations after them had blessings from the sacrifices that they met at that time, in order to give away and be blessed with many generations to follow them, right? In a good way, and and survive.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the picture you painted here because, like, even for me, knowing some of the oral histories, like, I'm not a historian. I know there's people out there who know way more than me, and I kinda just skim, in general. But even the historical narrative that is written, I don't know, like, I feel like I don't know if we would ever get, like, well, a 100% clear picture, but we're getting a picture enough to be able to know and understand the context of that time and that history. And we're combining it with, like, you brought up the Saskatchewan Herald. There's obviously archival research that could be done, and then the oral histories, right? So yeah, it was like this tumultuous time for our people, and that's how I identified in my mind, like, there's so much perspectives and narratives emerging from that time today, and it's interesting, and that's why I feel like we should have an important conversation because what's happening and what has happened is that Canada has absorbed that into their, like, historical colonial narrative, or,
Mm.
settler historians are leading the charge on interpreting what happened in this time, do historical research, whatever, like historians being historians, but some of it's wrong. Like some of it isn't tied to the lived experience of it, right?
Mhm. Yeah, you had yeah, it was just the picture that they're painting out there was really to fear our people, not look at us as a partner or a I guess that's what the treaty that's what the treaty was supposed to be, right? It was supposed to be a partnership and almost like a brotherhood in terms of, I don't know, English terms, I guess, and moving forward and together into the future, right? That we benefit in equal uh, terms off the land and its resources, right? There's so much here. There's so much land, so much resources. Like, yeah, there'll be a lot for us to be able to live side by side here and on into the future that didn't wasn't supposed to be living on reserves though that were so small, right? And then unfair terms of 1 square mile per family of five. Yeah, how unfair was that? And to question that, people don't question that. Like at the condition, given the conditions there of starvation, how many people were actually able to have 5 kids before they can actually earn 1 square mile to add to their reserve size? And today, you look at it, how many people have a family of five or are able to support a family of five? Conditions are nowhere comparable to back then. But in a modern sense, looking back and reflecting today, like how hard it would it be to have 5 kids,
Mhm.
or 4 kids? I mean, or even three is a lot, right? So
Yeah.
that's something that a lot of people don't factor in. But
Yeah. You said we weren't supposed to be on the reserves, right? So there's
mhm.
interesting narratives around that. Unpack that for our listeners because I have a feeling some people will probably be hearing that for the first time.
So that yeah, the terms of the treaties were, yes, to set aside land, but these were almost like intended to be preservation sites for our people to preserve sacred sites and also a place to practice ceremonies.
Mhm.
And but we weren't supposed to live on them, right? That was the difference there. That we just finished affirming that, and the treaty commissioner that negotiated the number of treaties told us that, or ask the question, where does your country begin and where does it end? That's why we have these treaty boundaries, right? That's why we have those maps. And all of these crooked, jagged boundaries that people question, like why couldn't they just make them like the provinces, all square and everything like that? But even those descriptions in the written part of the treaties, that's just one of the few important things of the written part of the treaties that we can, I guess, that are considered usable. Those graphic descriptions, other academic researchers have studied those and did make a lot of conclusions that only masters of the land could have given those types of descriptions of the land. Those could not be done by modern surveyors at that time, or the most uh, educated of, I guess, white society members. They couldn't, they wouldn't be able to give those descriptions.
Yeah.
So our people knew the land well enough to be asked on the spot that the day that the one stingy day that they gave our people to negotiate, they were able to say and provide these graphic descriptions of the land, of where, and in doing, didn't overlap, or didn't exaggerate, right? They didn't exaggerate those descriptions where it could have caused offense to Blackfoot in Treaty 7, to the Blackfoot Confederacy, right?
Mhm.
All of the nations there, gave their description, which coincided with ours, right? Exactly because we had treaties with them in order to establish our presence here in the prairies, as those Plains Cree people uniting with Soto and Nakota peoples, right?
Mhm.
That way to become the big force here on the
Yeah.
prairie, and establishing Treaty 4 and later Treaty 6 as our country. That no other nations outside of this declared territory that we affirmed at the time of treaty can say is theirs. This is our country. But we're at no point did we agree to live on reserves. Those were
Mhm.
supposed to be reserves, right? That preserve things.
Yeah, like they're reserved for us, only us, right? You say
Yeah.
that today and people kind of, kind of get taken back because it's like, no, this was only supposed to be for us, like no settlers allowed, but we were allowed to, traverse, hunt, and live on our in our traditional territories. But the Indian Act became this like sort of prison model, right? You got to stay there,
Mm.
pass system, you got to ask to leave, and now sort of this normalized lifestyle of, again, the reserves being less than. But when you look at it and unpack history from our perspective and our understanding, things make clearer sense, right? That no, like, yeah, Poundmaker is, really close to sacred sites. It is reserved for like the Indian way of life, right? And yeah, I think that's a conversation that more people need to have because we are in a time where people are discounting the reserve. And
Yeah.
it bugs me because I live here, but also like we jokingly said, my backyard's bigger. My garden is bigger than, people living in the city. And if
Mhm.
something were to happen in the world, it makes sense because people would probably come back to the reserve to hunt, live, maintain the Indian way of life while some sort of like collapse is happening or something, right? So it
Yeah.
makes sense our ancestors were thinking about these things because for me, the big thing too is like the point of clarity for them at that time. Like they didn't experience residential school. Obviously, the Indian Act came into play later, but in the mid 1800s, they were operating from a very clear perspective and clarity of who they are, fluent in the language, fluent in the history and cosmology. And the reason I want to make that point is because we are in a time now where I know the Lakotas did it, Blackfoots do it, even Cree people and communities are doing it, where they're just drawing these really big, extensive maps. Sorry, just like it just so happens to be all the natural resources are in that extension too, you know what I mean? Are they
Yeah.
really transboundary? Yeah, those were probably territories we navigated and were mobile in, but at the time of when we were sitting down and having these conversations from the point of clarity, there was like very real geopolitical contexts for indigenous people alive. But yeah, we are in this time where all of a sudden these big maps are showing up, it's all of a sudden all of North America is like one tribe's territory.
Mhm. And that's what treaties did, right? It put a big pause on the evolution of our nations and the expansions, right? Like before treaty, that was all taking place, right? Our peoples were expanding and expanding into more and more territory, and fighting with the Blackfoot Confederacy and doing so, right? And really establishing this as our place. But at the time of treaty, boom, you have treaty territories that are actually, Treaty 4 and 6 belong to three nations, and also Blackfoot Confederacy that belongs to a number of nations there as well too. But apparently, they did make a declaration that Treaty 7 is Blackfoot territory, right? And there are the nations. You have Dakota there. You also have Montana band, right, of Cree that are part of Treaty 7 there from Musqueam, um, that signed into Treaty 7, and you have the Sutuna, and but anyway, uh, but yeah, you have those big maps, but you have like at one point in history, did the Métis try to make a treaty with our people, right? And a lot of people don't don't ask that question or want to find out, right? And then I did, and then I did find out, and what I found out was that the Métis were actually participants in Treaty 4 and also Treaty 6, but were excluded, right? And how they were excluded from having a presence in those agreements was that they were taken out by the Indian Act. They were their rights were stripped by the Indian Act. But again, going back to Manitoba, and the attempted establishment of Manitoba being the country for Métis people, they didn't do any groundwork, right? Establishing treaties with the indigenous nations there, right? They just set up and well, drew on a map where they're gonna put Manitoba, and and at no point were they negotiating with our people and trying to get that done. But then instead worked with Canada to do that, right? And it's always working in side by side with Canada
Mhm.
to get asking for rights. And it's a complete opposite to our people, where our leaders have always been on the mindset that we own everything, and this is ours,
Yeah.
and everything that Canada did is in the wrong, and that we had treaties to already bring the result there. The answers to all our problems today will always have to go back to the treaties, what our people had envisioned, right? And but yeah, that's this homeland of maps and by all these other nations nowadays are almost extreme, and don't realize that the affirmations that were made at the time of treaties, that
Mhm.
they had their chance at the time of treaty to dispute, and they didn't. And but what you had then was people that were very would no weren't hesitant to take militant action to defend the territory at that time, right? The real homeland security. They,
Yeah, and then I wanna
they,
add too, like, when we see those expansive maps, like, that's straight up just, like, capitalism, like, reactionary to capitalism, to
Mhm.
provincial and federal government negotiation tactics, like, they want a stake, right? They want a stake or a seat at the table to have these conversations, but no, it's like, we were here first, right? And nation to nation
Mhm.
exists for our people, and, yeah, like, that's the grounding relationship and conversation that we need to ultimately go back to assert sovereignty, nationhood, and conversations. Because, yeah, we are in this era where, like you highlighted, soil degradation is taking place, resource extractions taking place. We're, like, at these peak, very big, expansive extraction projects are just devastating land further. So this assertion of who we are, and even bring it into modern conversations of how does our homeland security look like? How does our resistance look? I think is fundamental. Um,
Mhm.
but tying it back to, I guess, like, yeah, like, taking up arms or defending our people, because, yeah, like, if we were to talk about 1885, there's some really key, I guess, like, rules of engagement I wanted to highlight with you around that time,
Yeah.
um, because it wasn't necessarily like a militant action or guerrilla warfare, right? So
Mhm.
let's jump into that conversation. May 2nd, 1885, we laid the groundwork, Indian Act, looking at territory, looking at treaty, all these big conversations that we're cramming into one little podcast episode. And if you're mad, Well, maybe jump on and have a conversation with us, and we can have these conversations for everybody to hear.
Yeah, if they're mad, they can do what they did back then to start a lot of these amendments on the Indian Act is go complain to your member of parliament or member of legislative assembly, and then then the changes will come in the form of an amendment to the Indian Act that still rules our people today. No, but
Yeah, do your part on that end.
yeah, and then get mad when we win against that and find out in the courts that, well, yeah, the land still belongs to us and, your people had, no right to sell, titles and start taxing each other on indigenous people's land, right? So
For sure. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It always goes back to the square one, right? This was ours,
yeah.
and we wanted to get along and live peacefully, but of course, these settler colonial projects and land expansion projects take place and just fucked it all up, and we're dealing with that where people just normalized, "Oh, Canada's here, we're here to stay." No, it doesn't exist. Like, it doesn't exist in the reality of the conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So anyway, we go back to the days before May 2nd now, like the week before. We had exactly 1 week, our ancestors were given a heads up, right? So Colonel Otter arrives from Swift Current. He took a train to Swift Current and marched his troops north. His troops were actually supposed his unit was supposed to go to straight to Batoche, but they came to Battleford on the way, and then they met up with some of the people that were all taking refuge into the fort. You had the Saskatchewan Herald that painted such a horrible picture of what was taking place at that time, right? The Riel and the Métis were fighting, and the armies were all fighting, and then the Indians are all. I'm just gonna say Indians were all fighting and wanting to be violent, and already you have the comics in those papers that are painting our people as these violent looking savages, right? And all that. But they did a good job of that, and it made a lot of people scared of us. And so you had all these people taking refuge in Fort Battleford, and Colonel Otter arrives, does some investigating. He's taking in reports. Oh, these people came in, they ransacked the town, and they took all of these things. And well, who did you see last? And that's when they said Poundmaker. Poundmaker was the one that came to the fort and was asking for things, and it was his people that, because we didn't give them anything, took and looted the whole town while we're taking refuge in the fort and burned our houses down. Basically, that's what it is in a nutshell, right? There's a lot of details to that. So this was almost a week before May 2nd. So they started planning things, and Colonel Otter had no authority to directly take troops or split his troops. He had 350, or no, he had like 700 troops or so, something like that, and he had no authority, but he was trying to garner that, but also trying to see what he could do. He had something to prove, so he took it as a time. He looked at it as a time where hey, well, this guy Poundmaker seems like somebody that I could probably take some troops and go massacre. My name will be in the history books forever. He got a very, very loose, permission from General Middleton. It was, very broad, but he interpreted it that he had permission. But if you look at General Middleton's, reports, he said, like, Otter and his troops, like, don't know what they're up against, and they, they're up for a bloodbath, basically. Like, he said that, on the side after he found out that Otter had taken troops and we're gonna go to Poundmaker. So you had that, but one of the police scouts, this is from our late Mushum Jim or James Tootoosis I have a recorded article or a recorded interview from him. recalls being told this by the scout, the exact scout at the time for the police, because he lived to be an old man, and when our Muslims were kids, he'd come and visit still in Poundmaker and would tell these stories of the rebellion. What they referred it to at that time as the rebellion, but we know that it wasn't a resistance either. It was a defense. We our people totally planned to defend themselves and maintain their stance on treaty as peace, right? So anyway, this police scout was hired by the police, and namely because he had the fastest horse in the whole district. Everybody knew it. Everybody knew him, and he was the one that was hired by the police. And Colonel Otter looked at him as being trustworthy, and he was going to use him to guide them to Poundmaker. A week before, this police scout, his name was James Bird, and he was Métis. Well, they didn't say Métis then. They said half breed, and a lot of people don't know. Else also is that not everybody that is Métis by way of having relatives that can be traced to the Red River. They a lot of them don't actually want to be called Métis. They prefer half breed. And I talked to a lot of people that, and even more preferably the term Mapito Igosa. It's in the Cree word, because there's almost a little bit of sacredness to why they were referred to as that name, not just being half blood, half of Indian blood. Right? So there's Jim Bird, overhears this. He's told these things, but what the police didn't know, and what the Colonel Otter didn't know as well, was that Jim Bird was actually the best friend of Chief Poundmaker. That was Chief Poundmaker's best friend. They're best bros, and he's like got all this pressure on him now. Like, holy, they I gotta go tell my bro. Like,
Yeah.
this is what they're gonna make me do, but at the same time, I gotta tell him that I'm gonna still do it, and but I'm gonna go give him the heads up. So first thing he did, once that meeting was over with the soldiers, took off straight to Poundmaker. I went and told them. He said, "I'm gonna. This is what they're gonna do. This is what they're gonna talk. This is what they're talking about. They're coming here. They're gonna attack your people." And he said they got all this. He gave them all. He just spilled the beans.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he said, you're gonna have to accept that I'm gonna bring them here, but I'm not gonna fight. I'm not gonna fight with them. I'll stay way back. I'll just point from a distance where to go, and
Yeah.
I'll let them take it from there. So so they had a week. Poundmaker, was taken aback by that, because he was trying to be on good terms, and now finding out that they're actually going to come here with their army, and they're just going to try wipe us out. That's what
Mhm.
they're talking about
Mm.
for their own, decorations of war and everything like that. That's all they're coming here for.
Yeah. I
Uh,
like that Jim Bird reference because I think that's a good, like, framework for people to think about, right?
mhm.
Like, in times of, like, where we're at is you have to be willing to side with righteousness,
Yeah,
and he did. That's a good reference point.
they stayed friends even after, right? And he had a job to do, and it was understood and accepted, and they never befriended each other after that. And Jim Bird also stayed a friend of our family, right? For a long time after. He used to come visit and tell these stories like that. And you know, so they had this all this time to prepare, and it's always been a thing that that researchers and historians have always tried to see the importance of the uh, the erection of a soldier's tent, or of a war lodge, right? And trying to implicate that that there were it was them, it was the Indians that were getting violent, right? That
Yeah.
they it was them that were the ones that were planning the attack,
Mhm.
and they've always tried to go back and paint that picture of our people.
'Cause that does exist in the historical record, right, where they say
Yeah.
that, well, they did put up a warrior's lodge,
Hmm.
which is sort of like, from the outside view, yeah, the warrior's lodge where, the warriors sort of assume this governance position now. But it makes sense because Jim Berg came there 5 days before, so they had to enact their traditional governance system to meet that new information.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So you had all of these things taking place too, right? There was also the farming instructors, another farmer were killed in the Eagle Hills. That's currently where Red Pheasant Reserve and Mosquito, Grizzly Bears Head, Lean, those reserves are.
Mhm.
And those were the farming instructors that were looking after those bands. They were murdered, and also in a weird way, Poundmaker was blamed for that. Poundmaker's people were blamed for that as well. But a lot of people don't. What people don't factor in here is the geography, right? Of how far is Poundmaker from Red Pheasant? Modern travel times today to go from Poundmaker to Red Pheasant, it takes an hour and a half on the highways, right? Travel. And back then on horse, that was like a day's ride, a full day to get there. And somehow it was Poundmaker's people that murdered the two farming instructors in the Eagle Hills, and factor that in with the looting of the town. Poundmaker did show up. Uh, I don't have the specific dates of that. I do have them somewhere, but he did show up on April 30th, I think, though, just to give people a timeline. So April 30th shows up at Fort Battleford, and all of this fighting's going on, right? This whole the Northwest Rebellion is in full swing. April 30th was also the really, really close to the day of the Frog Lake Massacre. So Poundmaker intentionally takes a trip to Battleford to go visit the Indian agent, and the Indian agent there was Indian agent Ray, last name Ray, Rae. He calls for him at the fort. He's While everybody is all just locked up in fear inside the fort barracks at Fort Battleford, goes, knocks on the door and asks for Agent Ray. Agent Ray was known to be the most utterly cowardly guy around.
Hmm.
He was already like, just afraid for his life. And at no point does he agree, and under no circumstances wants to meet with Poundmaker. He's just deathly afraid of everybody, and Indians in particular. So he says, no, no, I'm not going to meet with him, no. And so who gets sent out was a chief factor of the HBC. He tells Poundmaker, no, the Indian agent said no, no rations, nothing. And Poundmaker just really is really firm, just we have all of this fighting going on, and I would just want to give my word to the Indian agent that we're not going to be involved. And then just to give us some tobacco and some tea, that'll be enough to take home to my people to tell them that we're gonna be we're gonna stick to the treaty. We're not gonna get involved in fighting.
Yeah.
And again, was refused. So he did take uh two wagons with him at that time. There's two wagons. And they weren't full of men or anything like that. There's just they were hoping that they'd get all these rations to bring back to the people. It was a sad time when he did come home and had nothing in the wagons.
Mm.
And all that looting took place when he was, after he left, though, right? And was implicated with that, which was not him or his people. And later on, you find from the witness accounts from that it was actually a farming instructor, a white farming instructor that himself was a known thief that was found with most of the goods that were reported as missing during all the looting. Was stashing it all over,
Mm.
and it was the
Wow.
one that was blamed for the stealing, but years after, right?
Yeah. That's wild because that's still like a narrative that kind of exists on the prairies, right? And we've been saying that for native people since like as Indians since day one is like white people stealing from white people, blaming Indians.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Where you have that exact same narrative being present around the battlefields, right? And being
Mhm,
when you're around bigger, and
mhm,
why we had events that took place where late Colton Bushy was killed because of this narrative and this belief that Indians are the ones going around to farms stealing. It and it still exists today.
mm.
But even after that took place, who is found with a lot of millions of dollars worth of farming implements and stuff like that that were reported stolen? A white farmer,
A
right?
white farmer. Yeah, I'll add that link to the show notes for people to click because, yeah, there was a white farmer that had, like, millions of dollars worth of farm equipment. And again, white people stealing from white people, blaming Indians exists out here.
Mhm. So he went home, empty wagons, and that, and it was around that time that he got the visit. Already knew that Jim Bird gave him all this information, right? Uh,
Mm,
Even days before that, he showed up at the fort. So it's now apparent now that they need to make preparations. So yeah, Warriors tent was put up, and they did have these discussions. There was different, almost like as if there was different proposals that were being heard at that time. Now Poundmaker, because that tent went up, was no longer chief, right? He was no longer able to have any influence over the Warriors now.
mm,
So they had other big names. Little Poplar, right, was one of them. Um, our great great grandfather, Yellow Mud Blanket, was the leader of one of the societies back then, the biggest of the societies, and he did have the most voice at that time.
mm.
And Findy, is reported in the histories, but he himself can, I guess, he spinned history to make himself look good, but he was known to be, just quote, which I'm full of shit.
Mhm.
And other researchers were given that advice that the interview with Mandelbaum, like he
Yeah,
offended a lot of people like that with that interview because he told them things that weren't true.
yeah.
He told David Mandelbaum things that weren't true.
Yeah, and Mandelbaum is the writer of the Cree ethnography, right?
Yeah, and one of the interviewers for the Indian Film History Project, right? You have printed articles that you can find on, I think it's the U of R that hosts those transcripts. So,
Mm,
but the recordings are in collections there at the Archer Library at the U of R. But yeah, it wasn't Findy that was the war chief, and like a lot of stories and a lot of history there, a lot of history and stories for this battle never came out until 2001. Even a lot of our families were so fearful of being able to share these openly, and they didn't want to share these stories because of that fear that still
yeah,
exists. And
yeah.
but it was Yellow Mud Blanket Oso Skiogop was the war chief because he was also older than Poundmaker, right? He was the older brother. He was the elder brother, and then was also the leader of the society back then. And a lot of these proposals were coming, right? Of how are we going to defend? How are we going to, you know, they got these things here that they're going to use. Like, how do we put up a defense with that? Our guns are we have cheap guns, we have bows and arrows, we have
Mhm.
we don't even have the support of the numbers, right? Like they just finished telling these 200 mounted soldiers that they were all Nakota warriors. I mean that were going around threatening people, and they were the ones that were taking a lot of stuff from farms and stuff like that, and it was Poundmaker that actually went and saved the people in that little village called Bersailles to on his way to Battleford, I guess. They did something like that, and almost half of the people went with Poundmaker because Poundmaker's sister was married to the farming instructor there, Thomas Jefferson,
Mhm.
was the farming instructor for in Bersailles for, but was the farming instructor for Poundmaker Little Pine at that time, and but his Poundmaker's sister was married to him, so they took them as relatives because the town of Bersailles, the village of Bersailles at that time was a Métis village, and a lot of the people there were considered relatives to Poundmaker. So he went and made sure that they were going to be okay. And just when he showed up there, those 200 Nakota warriors showed up, and he took a lot of them left before those warriors showed up as well. And they went and took refuge in the fort in Battleford. And Poundmaker was under direct supervision of 20 or so of them, the residents that went with him. One was, some of them that made historical accounts were, number one was Father Louis Cochin, who was the Reverend that looked after the church there in Poundmaker, and then also Thomas Jefferson himself that made published accounts as well. So Louis Cochin's accounts, you can look at them up in library special collections, are reminiscences of Louis Cochin.
Mhm.
And then the history of provided by the witness account provided by Thomas Jefferson was the 50 Years on a Saskatchewan. That's the title of that book. And so these are considered the primary resources if you want to do research, right? There's very few of them. Um, but anyway, so they have all these people that are relatives and are being portrayed as prisoners.
Oh.
And to look after their safety because these 200 mounted warriors then followed Poundmaker and them back to Poundmaker, and then they put up this lodge, and the lives of all these 21 people are being threatened on the daily by these Nakota warriors.
Mm.
And to watch over their safety, Poundmaker employed Finding to look after them. So it's kind of like, I guess, the head of security.
Mhm.
So he had a lot of pull and a lot of voice, and he too was a leader of a younger society, right? What they called the Rattlers then, and he looked after the people there and make sure that they were none of them would be taken or kidnapped or anything, and of course had his warriors that were also looking after them in terms of security and securing them.
Mm.
So this war lodge goes up, and then they start planning and proposing how they're going to defend. There was one that let's just go attack them as they come, right, head on. And but there were other things that they had to plan, like well, we need to know when they're going to leave the fort. We need to be ready a long time before that to get in position, and also you know all of this has to be executed. So it was told to them that the land will take care of them, that to use the land against the soldiers. So that's they had the picture and everything in their minds of where this was to take place, and it was given in steps. Now you come to May 1st. The soldiers are all mobilized. They're ready to march. They leave the fort at three o'clock in the afternoon on May 1st. They march out of the fort, and there too, one of the other primary resources, you have this Lieutenant Castles that was part of the brigade, right? That's marching out to Poundmaker, giving his eyewitness accounts in the form of a diary. And that's where, as mentioned, I stepped on a lot of toes in doing my research in this project when I started in university for undergrad. I had to come up with a thesis and defend it in front of a panel and everything like that, just like a master's project. And I wasn't to use oral data; it was just to use research data, look at the primary and also secondary stuff.
Yeah.
And anyway, my supervisor through that was Dr. Blair Stonechild or Alexander Stonechild, who wrote Loyal Till Death. And it was, Loyal Till Death is one of the books that I had the most problem with. It was
Mm,
me it in terms of being from Poundmaker and knowing the history, growing up with it and being from there. The book itself, I couldn't put it together at the time of why was I so bothered by this? And at the time it was one word. And the one word was that, yeah, the troops showed up and were surprise attacked. And the one word in that Stonechild used was scrambled. The one word that Stonechild used was scrambled. So scrambled was not the way I understood our people coming to be. I just finished explaining that, they had this week to prepare. And then also there's another factor. Like when they started marching, they had to, like nobody asked like, well, how many wagons, how many, and you learn later that they had 2 weeks worth of supplies and ammunition. So they leave the fort at 3. And other researchers that have researched this topic over and over and over again in all the secondary sources are all non-indigenous. Blair or Alexander Stonechild, Blair Stonechild, Dr. Stonechild, I'll just say,
mhm,
being my supervisor, I learned from him, like face to face, that, it wasn't him that steered the project of Loyal Till Death. It was
mm,
Bill Weiser that did.
mm,
So again, you have all of these white academics determining the outcome of our history.
yeah,
Going back over 100 years of history there that our people have been our history has been determined by non-indigenous people, right? You know, and a lot of people say like, well, it's usually the ones that win the war that determine history, but in our sense, we won the war and we're still not, we were prevented from being able to tell our history because,
yeah,
the publishers wouldn't publish our work. They wouldn't do anything with their academic works at all. It wouldn't grade us high enough
yeah.
to have it published. Right? So,
Mhm. Yeah, valid point, like, valid take. Bill Weiser, I know his books are still out there, people refer to them. Even when you read, like, Saskatchewan history in context at this time, he's always the quote, right? It's always the citations on their resources, but as you're highlighting with the lived experience, oral histories, even your work pushing back as a student on those narratives, yeah, they kinda have to maintain this colonial narrative, right? And I know there's probably historians who are like, "You have to go with the written resources." But you highlighted, like, yeah, we gotta do our own research or we gotta make our own resources too with these conversations, right? Because ours aren't even in those books.
mhm.
Yeah.
So in doing the research I did, and I'm piecing together all of these things because you using the oral story that I grew up with as the back
Mhm.
that's steering this research, right? Not only that, but also geography. I'm factoring in two things in doing my research and taking the step towards telling Blair that, I'm gonna go against Loyal Till Death and I'm gonna prove you wrong. And he's like, "Bring it on." He said, like, "Let's
Mhm.
do it." And I learned these things and he wanted to see it. He was very supportive of it though.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to paint him in a bad picture, but he was very supportive and supported me through the work and allowed me to succeed and all that. And but in doing the research though, and I'm mentioning all the authors out there that did works on covering the Battle of Poundmaker or Battle of Cut Knife Hill and stuff with the Northwest Resistance or the Riel Rebellion and stuff like
Mhm.
that. They leave out parts that to me are so important that
Yeah.
that steer the whole history in a different way from these eyewitnesses that were there, and they left them all out. They every single one that I researched had never included that, I'm talking about this Lieutenant Castle's the reporting in his diary, just a little passage there, one paragraph. And then in that paragraph says, we marched at 3 p.m. And as soon as we leave the fort, there's columns of smoke rose on into the distance, signal fires. And, he even remarks that there's no way we can make a surprise attack.
Mhm.
And it just reminds me of the Lord of the Rings. They lit the signal fires and,
Yeah.
the, but,
Yeah, I remember you telling me that story, and I always found that fascinating because even from where my house is right now, you could technically see Battleford, like, on a good day,
mhm,
you'll definitely see the nights depending on or the lights depending on, like, cloud cover, but it's there, it's just over the horizon. And yeah, it would have been clearly visible, like signal fires even from Sweetgrass. Sweetgrass had a POW this summer and they launched fireworks and we could see them clearly
yeah,
from where we're at. So yeah, these signal fires are it's very cool because that means we also had a structure in play there, right? Like
mhm.
people were on alert, people were observing, there was ongoing like mobilization and organization of our communities.
Yeah, and in terms of geography, like Cut Knife Hill is mentioned in there, and you don't need to be on top of Cut Knife Hill to see Battleford, like you just
Mhm,
mentioned. Like where you guys live on the reserve, it's really right on a large portion of where the battle was fought. We live right on the battlefield,
mhm.
and it's on a high point facing the east. Towards Battleford, and you can from that vantage point, you can see clearly and, at that time, there was probably a whole lot less trees, and, you'd be able to see these troops coming from a long way away,
Yeah.
and, even possibly at night.
Yeah, and they were wearing red coats, right? Red
Yeah.
coats and white helmets, so
Not all of them, though, right? Not all of
yeah,
them,
some of
just,
the
the Northwest
yeah.
Mounted Police members.
Mhm,
That's one of the things I never agreed with either is that, they downplay. Canada is so good at, and Canadian historians are so good at downplaying, our people's
mm,
intelligence, right? And, but also, hiding elements of their, side of things as well in terms of, their what they've inflicted on our people, from their actions, right? And say like, Indian residential school, they downplay it, that being a form of genocide. The definition of genocide that was agreed to in 1946 by the United Nations countries was, in whole or in part is a core component of the definition of genocide that you can't partialize it, right? You can't divide it and say that, you know, uh, Canada committed cultural genocide. Like,
yeah,
we only, affected their culture. It wasn't a complete genocide, right? That's what Canada claims and Canada downplays.
yeah,
Uh, but there, with this history, they downplayed that this was an army. This was Canada forming an army. Canada took position of doing this sort of training and this sort of organizing when they went to World War One, when they took part in World War One, World War Two, right? It's the same thing. They mobilized an army. It wasn't what they say just a militia, right? Or just
yeah,
police. It was a whole mobilized unit that was Canada's army, not a militia. I
mm,
have a problem
yeah,
with that too.
mm,
So they come, they march, and they get so far as to where Table Mountain is today. There's that ski hill there. You can look. People can Google where Table Mountain ski. I don't know what the title is called, um, but there's a ski resort there, and there's a creek there. They call it Drumming Creek, and it's there where the soldiers took a rest from proceeding, and it was already too dark by the time they got there. And that's not even really the halfway mark of the journey. And we're talking a 36-mile journey, and I'm using miles because
mhm,
I'm not really into kilometers yet. I'm old school. But 36 miles they have to travel, and Table Mountain's not. not even halfway, and it was too dark for them to press on. So they had to wait there until the moon rose. They waited for the moon to rise so that would give them some light. So they had a lunch, late night lunch, midnight lunch at the Drumming Creek there by Table Mountain, and then proceeded once the moon rose. So they arrived at and were taken to what was presumed to be the camp of Poundmaker and his people. And the scouts reported that everybody's still sleeping. And so they set up. They managed to take position. I think it was about 600 yards away, they say, and positioned themselves on an opposite rise to where that camp was, and opened fire. And what they didn't know is that this was an abandoned camp or a decoy camp.
Mhm.
That it wasn't intended to be, but they figured they knew and they pictured the place where this defense was going to happen. So they went directly to the southwest, and it was the position up in the rise there that was flanked by two deep coulees. You know, they took a lot of stuff as much as they could with them. Some were able to take down their teepees, and they left a number of them though, right? All the people from Versailles were taken further up at the end of that one, the coulee that flanks the south of the battlefield today. So it's the one that goes the longest. Right at the top, at the end of there, that's where they were positioned alongside with the presence of Chief Poundmaker. So this is about a good 1,000 yards from actually where the action was taken. That's how a good distance. The women and children were taken onto the other side, the south to the south of Cut Knife Hill, the lookout, and that's probably another mile away, maybe mile and a half. And there were others that took. They were all mixed anyway, but the accounts there. I have a map of where they were positioned in actuality, and the warriors just took positions in the coulees and along the creek to the east. So you had the coulee from the creek flowing north south. That was the rear of the now battlefield, and you had warriors along there along the bushes waiting, and then you had up the coulee that went to the south of the battlefield, and then up the coulee to the north of the battlefield, and then at the very top, once you get to the top of the hill, about a good maybe 300-400 yards in, there's a bush, and the now present historical site is really close to that bush. It's just that bush is just a little northeast of the historical site. That warriors took position in there. On the opposite hill of the battlefield to the south, that's where our grandfather was positioned,
Mm. Mhm.
and that yellow mud blanket was there. And just maybe halfway down the hill there, that's where you had the one Nez Perce and another two others that were taking position in a foxhole somewhere there. And the Nez Perce, his name was Hole in the Nose, and he had one of these long octagon barrel American rifles. I'm not sure which kind that would be. And but anyway, so they took position up there, and the soldiers came in. Jim Bird stayed so far away, and alongside him was apparently, if anybody was to look at the picture of Big Bear at Fort Pitt, there's a picture of a lot of people all in a lineup.
Mhm.
But on the one end, on the right side, there's a man that's smoking a pipe
Mm.
in that photo. And they have his name on that photo. Somewhere you can find all the names of everybody that's in that photo. But that guy was at that battle. He was at the battle, and he was not too far away from where Jim Bird was. And he was one of the first ones to get shot after the gunfire erupted. He
Mhm.
was one of the first ones to get shot, and he got shot right through the mouth, he said. right, side to side, cheek to cheek, and all of his jaw almost got blown off. And he was trying to ask Jim Bird for a light to light his pipe, and came out of his foxhole. He managed to dig a quick foxhole, and then took a break, and then asked Jim Bird for, does he have a lighter, matches or something like that to light his pipe, and Jim
Mm,
said no, and then in doing, he came out of the foxhole, right, and then that's after he said no, and boom, got his
dang.
jaw blown off almost. So the way the story goes is they find the abandoned camp, like it was a completely abandoned, but in one teepee was Jacob Red Deer. He dug a foxhole inside of his teepee, and for some reason stayed behind. Now maybe they'd come in and try to talk or whatever, and like do something diplomatic,
Mhm,
but that didn't happen.
mhm,
Just opened fire, just boom, 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 straight at the teepees. They had they brought in a Gatling gun, and a Gatling gun, to those that don't know the specs of a Gatling gun, it's almost the one of the first repeating, almost machine gun type guns, that was a long barreled revolver type that it operated with the cranking of a lever, and as fast as you can crank is how fast it could shoot. So if you could crank it really fast, you're gonna make the action of a machine gun. And the caliber of that was 45-70 rounds.
mhm. Yeah,
And it was such a violent action that even the cartridges would be all exploded, or almost all split when they come out. Hey?
mhm,
Uh, and then they also had two 7-pound cannons with explosive grounds, and those would explode up upon impact. So they unleashed and these are fired through rifle barrels as well, right? So they're not just cannons with a ball, right? It's actually like a big, huge bullet with an explosive head and everything, and that impacts the gunpowder inside. So they unleashed hell on that abandoned camp. Boom, 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 and didn't send anybody, and then they discover, oh, it's abandoned. But
yeah,
if you think, like, if they left behind, if everybody stayed there and it was actually a surprise attack, that would be women and children, and everybody living there, that would be just all shot up
yeah,
and killed.
yeah,
So the thanks to our ancestors there, that we're still here today because of how they were guided, and
yeah,
their beliefs, and
yeah.
also what brought them to take to use the land and then go to the higher parts to defend themselves. Hmm.
Yeah, definitely. And that first camp, I think that's like the tipping point, right? In my mind, observing it, hearing these stories, and being on the landscape, my interpretation is that like Canada didn't come to play, right? They shot like thinking they're gonna do a surprise attack, and that's when like all diplomatic bets are off. They're here to kill us, and I always emphasize that it's like Canada came to straight up kill us, but
Mhm,
at the same time a lot of historical narrative doesn't they omit that first camp attack.
mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
they
was
do.
omitted from the record.
Yeah, some of them lightly go over it.
Mhm.
They talk that they opened fire, and then they discover that the warriors are off some distance to the west, right? They just go like that. So all their attention is focused to the west, and that throughout the point that of being surprise attacked, like it says in Loyal Till Death as well, that you can't you can't awake a sleeping camp, they say, and stuff like that. Like all of these things to paint us as really obtuse, and
Yeah.
people that are just super unintelligent, that for some reason we couldn't hear along with the troops, there was 325 soldiers, right? And there was 48 teams of wagons carrying 2 weeks supplies of ammunition and all that. You'd hear that coming from Battleford. Like, there's no way, even if you're sleeping, that would wake you up, even if they're like maybe 3 kilometers away, that
Yeah.
you'd hear that coming. And you'd hear the horses, you'd hear all of that noise come in
Mhm.
from that way. Like it's just impossible. Like even one wagon, how loud it is. Like 48 of them though. Right? Like let's give our people some credit here that yeah, they could hear it. Like,
Mhm.
and, like not just say like, oh, we were just sleeping in and we're just lazy Indians that
Exactly.
can wake
Yeah.
up and fight and
Yeah.
scramble to get together and somehow beat the army. But
Yeah.
so they get to the bottom of the hill from after leaving the abandoned camp, and the scouts go discover. At that point, you don't have Jim Bird in a picture now. You have these two other scouts that are these two white scouts that follow the tracks. And one of these are, I guess you described them as being very racist and really hates Indians just in general. Is one of the scouts, and he's known. He was known amongst everybody in the whole area, and went up and they get to the bottom of the hill, and they say that we're they once all the troops get to the bottom of the hill, they feed and water the horses down there towards the creek there, and then these two scouts say they're gonna go up and do some reconnaissance. So they get the go ahead to go, and they go up, and then that's when they started hearing gunfire. So the word is these scouts on our side, our people's side, is these scouts came up, and as soon as they seen us, they opened fire, or they started shooting at us.
Mm.
And that's when they said they had no choice but to fire back to defend themselves. So that all that gunfire started happening on there. That's what unleashed the troops to start mobilizing up the hill there. And this isn't Cut Knife Hill. This is just the hill there that's going up towards the historical center
Yeah.
from the creek. So
Mm.
they get up, and all of this gunfire and exchange happens, and one of the defenses of our people were to use dummies. So they had dummies that were, I guess, like a scarecrow on a stick that they put up in the air, and then that would cause soldiers to fire at it. So yeah, the plan was like let's make them use up their ammunition and stuff like that.
Mhm.
But again, they didn't know they had like 2 weeks worth of supplies and ammo though, right? So
Mhm.
so they do that, and then fire, but when they'd fire, they'd expose themselves and then get shot at too, right? So, but the our people were so good at making themselves appear more in number. It was a tactic that was used over and over and over again. The troops estimated that there was probably 500, and that they probably have Big Bear with them. So
Mhm.
at some point, the efforts of the Saskatchewan Herald and their propaganda affected the soldiers even. It put a fear into them as well that there's no way that there's this Poundmaker here. Big Bear's here too as well. Like, all this firepower hitting us. Like, they had that fear. And then you had Billy Fox. Billy Fox was a Toronto Star reporter. He was hiding under a wagon, and he was writing as he was, as this was happening. So that's why his account is really reliable. And also Father Louis Cochin, because they were writing as it was happening, right? And the other primary sources there, Thomas Jefferson, Lieutenant Castles. These are reflections, right? That they wrote down later. Um,
Yeah.
and but Castles was actually writing his diary as he was going. Right? So he had his diary, I guess, in a pocket as well too. Um, but yeah, so they get up halfway. They're now fighting halfway up the hill. They lose one of the 7-pound cannons down the hill. The Gatling gun is useless because it can't fire uphill.
Mm.
And it was their goal in the start that Colonel Otter said they were going to have lunch once they get on top of the hill. And they never made it. They just barely got on top of the hill where they started realizing that the rear was closing in on them. They now have to fight and put their attention on that retreat, because there's no way once they got on top of the hill, they felt even more overpowered because they started seeing, a lot of reflections of mirrors coming out of the bush there that I was describing earlier on top of, once they get on top of the hill. That's 300 yards away to the east, to the west, I mean, you have all of these mirror reflections coming out.
Mm,
Um, Toronto Star reported, Billy Fox reported Poundmaker using a mirror to direct the soldiers, but that wasn't Poundmaker on that hill. And if you ever see a photo of Chief Poundmaker and Yellow Mud Blanket side by side, same height, almost same look, that a white person wouldn't be able to tell them apart. It would be just you just think, oh, that's Poundmaker, like from that distance, you wouldn't be able to really facially recognize somebody to be, to confirm that that's actually that person. But the brother, you'd think, you wouldn't be able to separate to put them apart. He was directing people with a mirror, and he reported that. So they're fighting, pressing on, and they Gatling guns no use to them. By the way, they contracted a U.S. soldier there by the name Captain Howard from all the way from Connecticut to bring two Gatling guns and instruct Canadian soldiers on how to operate it. So he wasn't present at Poundmaker, though. He was with the other Gatling gun that was headed to Batoche when Otter split his troops to taking 325 to Poundmaker. So they got only to the top of the hill, had to start fighting their way back, and they managed to do that. And one of the things our people didn't want to do was to pursue them. They didn't want to, because again, we have to make it appear as a defense. We're not the ones that are violent here. We maintain peace and our word to the treaty. So yeah, we can wipe them out on the way home, and but we can't do that though. That'll only worsen things for us, and we'll face those consequences in the future.
mhm,
And a lot of reports say Poundmaker stopped the warriors from fighting by raising a pipe stem in the air from that hill. But again, Poundmaker wasn't able to use that pipe stem because he wasn't the leader of that society. So with these eyewitness accounts, it was our people that oh well, that was Yellow Mud Blanket. He was the war chief. He was the leader of that society that carried that pipe stem. Both Poundmaker and Finday would never be able to touch that. And then we commanded the soldiers there that was it. That's all the fighting now. And just leave them and let them go.
mhm.
So they let them go, and there are stories that these soldiers heard our people laughing at them when they were left bleeding. So that's in essence that's the story of the battle. And but there's a lot of things that there was 8 soldiers that were killed. There was Corporal Lowry from the Northwest Mounted Police, Corporal Slade, Corporal Constable Burke, a bugler by the last name Folks, and then there was 2 soldiers, Private Rogers and Private Osgood from the Governor General's Foot Guards,
Mm,
and Private Dobbs and Chaz Wanger was a transport officer. So Private Dobbs was from Balfour Rifles. Though there was 2 that were left on the battlefield that uh, Father Louis Cochin buried. One was an Indian, and the other one was a soldier, he said. And the Indian we know as is the Nez Perce that tried to dodge bullets and taking a run, and ended up getting shot and died right on the spot. And he was buried where he fell. And the soldier Osgood was also buried there, and they didn't come from until June.
mm,
So Private Osgood and Rogers were the first casualties of the Governor General's Foot Guards as well. So
mm,
they're honored every year. When Osgood was brought back, he was laid in state in Ottawa for a while, and was buried beside Rogers. and just the common cemetery there, not the military ones. So it's a little bit of history there. So there was 14 wounded. And in the papers there, and also in Colonel Otter's reports, he said they must have killed like at least 100 Indians, but there was only six.
Yeah.
So only six casualties there, and I got a list of those. That there was one of them, and there was two of them, and they were from Sweetgrass.
Mm.
So you had the presence of our people, and this goes back even before that. That Poundmaker, Little Pine, Sweetgrass. These are the core of this the warriors, so the manpower that fought there at that time. And it must have been just around 150 or so. They said at least, at the very least, because those 200 mounted Assiniboine warriors were told to leave. That they didn't want to get anybody else involved. So the casualties on the Indian side were from Sweetgrass was half this guy, and tracking a star. So half this guy was Pascamin's dad, and then tracking a star, and then one named Medicine. They don't know where he was from though. His name was just Medicine Muskie.
Mm.
Two Stonies, they said, and they don't have names for them. And then the one Nimepu or Nez Hole in the Nose. So Hole in the Nose came with another one. There was two Nimepu and Nez warriors, scouts from Chief Joseph's people that came up. One of them went missing 10 days before the battle, and was never ever found. They don't know what happened to him. They don't know if he was killed or what, but he just disappeared and left no trace. And but the other one stayed and he fought. And was said to have killed one of the policemen. Shot him right in the head, and they just seen that policeman's legs go backwards off his horse, fell off the back of his horse, got shot right in the head. And that was a shot from a Ninja Mountain there all the way down. There's a little tiny cliff at the creek there, right by the crossing where the soldiers crossed. That's how far that shot was made. They said he took the shot, and then he put his rifle down by his waist and then kind of moved forward to look, as if to look closer. But it took a while for that bullet to hit that soldier. Bing, boom, hit him. These eyewitness accounts are really a lot of the historians missed all of these, and you know I can't say I covered them all,
Yeah.
but again they missed that. And they miss the also that the Métis scouts that were sent were they forged a letter for Chief Poundmaker. They
Yeah.
brought a pre-drafted letter, and they were trying to get Poundmaker to sign it, and he said he wants no part of that. And a lot of people think too that there was some friendship between Poundmaker and Riel, but the two of them didn't even know each other.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
this is sort of what Canada really puts down on record too, right? Is that there's this conversation around a letter that was like, that Palmaker endorsed the rebellion or signed a letter. But from our perspective and understanding of the engagement on Palmaker, like on the reserve, was that no, this was a defense operation. We defended ourselves, and there was no official, formal involvement in the rebellion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And at that time, he had also no power to or authority to sign, right? To, actually, if you want to look at it that way, like, but it's not his call to say anything, to convince the soldiers not, to take part in anything. But at the same time, he was witness to tell them no,
Yeah.
like by Thomas Jefferson said, Poundmaker did refuse them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When did that letter show up? Like, when the terms of the timeline of everything we talked about, when did, because it's such a controversial conversation. Because people want Poundmaker Indian Reserve to be classed into this Métis rebellion narrative or the Northwest rebellion narrative, but from our grassroots perspective, we're not. So, like, when did this letter show up, and what's the story behind it?
So this letter it did show up at the same time the Warriors Lodge went up. So
Mhm,
this was one of the other things that were presented, right? A lot of researchers have relied on court documents on the trial of Poundmaker to go off of in terms of evidence, I guess, that was submitted at the trial where they said they found the wagons on the way. They intercepted the wagons that were left behind by the troops. So when the troops left Poundmaker, Poundmaker Reserve, they left behind those 48 wagons.
mhm,
They left behind all the wagons, and then they only took the survivors and the dead and the wounded. And that's all they were able to handle, taking all that back to them. So they left these 48 wagons worth of ammunition and supplies. So that kind of gives some clout to Jim, right? That they could have did something very serious,
yeah,
with all of that ammunition and supplies. They had 2 weeks worth of supplies and ammunition, and it was just right there after the battle took place. So boom, jackpot. Like it
the
appears in
jackpot.
the court records that they intercepted those wagons though on the way to Batoche. But if you look in General Middleton's reports, Poundmaker surrendered all 48 wagons when he surrendered himself with all the ammunition and supplies. So they didn't take anything and they didn't utilize it.
Mhm,
He gave himself up for peace,
yeah,
so that our people would not face any more bloodshed. So they leave out that part. They don't connect that how strategic our people were in terms of peace, diplomacy, military. You have all of these military units today that come out and do tours. I took them
yeah,
on one, walked it, and went over the maps with the captain there, and he was
mhm,
just blown away when we got to the bottom of the hill. Like, why would they go up? Why
yeah,
would they proceed? Like, he's just like, that's such a disadvantage. And you can't really experience that until you're there, until you've
yeah.
actually walked there. So,
Lieutenant Dan wanted this battle?
yeah. He got
Yeah,
laughed off the battlefield, and it was one of the most significant losses in Canadian military history.
yeah, it
And
was.
it's not portrayed as that, right? And if you want to compare battles of really how big this actually is a lot of historians will make the conclusion that it's just because it wasn't a massacre
Mhm,
on any part of like the Indian side or the army side, because Palmaker's people didn't massacre the army, let's say, it's not a significant event in history.
mm,
And but in terms of comparison, like the Battle of Little Bighorn, with
mhm,
where Custer got massacred, his whole troops. But if you compare those two in terms of numbers, 150 Indian warriors against 325 trained, experienced Canadian soldiers. Where they had sharpshooters. Like Governor General's foot guards and what sharpshooters, right? And you had a unit of sharpshooters, and you look at the Battle of Little Bighorn. You had almost 1,500 Indians versus a unit of 200. And the only difference there, why it's significant, is because Custer got massacred. He lost to the American flag on the battlefield, and why the Lakota and all those involved with that one claim that the American flag fell on the battlefield there,
yeah,
and now it belongs to the Lakota people, right?
mhm.
But they don't go take it that far.
Yeah, it's valid, like, that's a valid critique, and I had friends too that from other tribal groups, like, who kinda, I wouldn't say scoff, because obviously, Little Bighorn's very important battle too, unique histories there, but, some when you
Mhm.
look at the numbers, they're like, yeah, let's just not start a tribal war with these
Yeah.
historical narratives, but real valid take is that, yeah, that the battle that took place here is pretty significant when you remove this colonial narrative, right? That, man,
Mhm,
this could have been a pretty big event if we if we pecked off those soldiers all the way to Fort Battleford or even all the way to Swift Current and destabilized them, it would have been a whole different story. Yeah.
mhm. And, you have to think too, like, the soldiers must have quite a bit of fear on the way too, because seeing those columns of smoke,
Yeah.
going up meant that, there could be Indian fighters all the way there.
Yeah.
Are we gonna die at some point on the way there? Or are we gonna be able to get there? You know, like,
Mhm.
are we even gonna make it? You know?
Mhm.
That's what if I was to empathize with the soldiers at that time and the fear that's out there, with that and, that I'd be thinking that if I was, a white guy, from having no experience, with the Indians here and the terrain and the land and, just I'd be thinking that, like, "Holy cow, like, what are we getting into?" Like, seeing those columns of smoke rise, giving the ultimate heads up that, soldiers are coming, like,
Yeah. For
those are
sure, definitely. I have a question too, I guess, while we're talking about, I guess, like, the Sioux narrative because, like, lack of like, the Ochete Shakowee and all that narrative in the US, did that tie into the Nakota in your analysis, historical analysis? Did that tie into why the Nakota were pretty aggressive in this narrative up here?
the thing that people don't, acknowledge there is the history between Nakota and Dakota and Lakota, right? And the separations, that existed, well after, into the 1600s, the late 1600s, when they separated, and really were almost enemies at some point, and where the Nakota or the Assiniboine were actually, outcasts, of the seven council fighters altogether. Right? They were absolutely just, um, so just expelled from that, if you want to say in terms, and only became, really powerful, when they got Plains Cree, as an ally,
Yeah.
and were
Mhm.
able to retain some power that way, in terms of defense from the Dakota, from impeding on their territory, what was perceived as their territory as Dakota.
Yeah. Yeah, I wanted to ask that question because there is, like, this modern reconnection between Nakotas and Dakota and Lakota. Right,
Mhm,
and then even in my family, being from Carry the Kettle, having very Cree Nakota histories and narratives, it's kind of like it's interesting because, we are these 2 tribal groups that have very unique histories and lineages, but in
mhm,
context to this history here, like, there's very real, like, context to being Nakota and Cree in this region, and I feel like
mhm.
you're speaking to it, right? Is that there's this interesting dynamic that a lot of people who are coming at it from, like, the more modern learning your identity and history is like, no, you weren't necessarily, like, tied to the Lakota. There was kinship, obviously, probably relationship, but it was a whole different mission entirely.
I think the thing that separates, us from that, like, in terms of, our blood, right? Like, blood wasn't a concept, but at the same time, there's this whole concept or philosophy with Plains Cree people is that, yeah, we can say we're, ne Nihilak, meaning I am Cree, I am Plains Cree, but in saying, like, that your whole ability of saying that, relies upon, how you see the world, right? How you speak, how your language, interprets, what you see out there in your surrounding environment. And, a lot of our people, from Poundmaker are more Assiniboine by blood, or Dakota, if we wanted to go by blood. But because we have this concept of Wahkotuin, right? Wahkotuin allows us to see people without the concept of blood, right? Because this philosophy of how we relate to one another, even goes beyond biological, you know, uh, biological relations, right? That if I adopted somebody, then they're just part of us. You know, that love doesn't have that divide. Just because they're not biological doesn't mean that they're not a part of us, or not. I can love them different. That unconditionalness, unconditional love, as a part of that philosophy, and in being, it almost creates this way of being. That allowed our people to just intermarry with anybody. But in the end of the day, we'd say, ni ni hua, ni hiwat.
Yeah.
But we're so mixed blood, right? Going back centuries. And
Yeah.
a lot of people, I kind of shake my head when people say like, I'm full blood Dakota, or I'm full blood, this or that, no regard for their history, like, where they came from, being like probably mixed blood. There's so much of their system that they're probably everything, right?
Mhm.
But even through race, right? That separating ourselves through race wasn't really a thing, actually.
Mhm.
And eventually, that even before we were Plains Cree people, we intermarried with white people, and then all of a sudden you have Métis people or half-breed people, or all of a sudden starting a culture, taking the French language and taking Cree language and making words, right, and making a culture and combining the different dances and stuff like that. So I don't know, it's kind of a thing, and kind of comparable, I guess, to this invention of Canadian identity, right? That
Mhm.
the whole thing of Canada being a multicultural country is almost like almost as the same principle as Plains Cree,
Mhm.
and I guess in a sense where you have a people that don't even have their own language, though. That's the
Yeah.
difference between us and Canadians, though. Plains Cree versus Canadians. Is that Canada doesn't have its own language, and
Yeah.
that's yeah. I point a finger at all those people that share that Pierre Trudeau poster saying, oh, you don't speak your language, and why you have many business asking for rights from us and stuff like that. But Canada can never take a position as a nation, right? If
Yeah.
they want to use language as being a determining factor of
Mhm.
establishing a nation, that Canada would have to develop its own language then, because
Yeah.
English is British, goes to the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
Same for the states, right? But they still have ties to the crown, and they're still part of the United Kingdom, and they're not their own. They're not really nations, right? So
Yeah, Canada doesn't have its own language. You speak English and French.
yeah, takes for English and French as official languages.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I guess, like, one of the big things I wanted to highlight with this conversation in general too was, yeah, like, the oral history of what took place there. And, the reality too is I know, like, our relatives in Little Pine, Sweetgrass, and, the surrounding area in general, they all have stories tied to this, and this is only, like, one grassroots perspective of these stories and what took place there, and not wanting to, like, step on anybody's toes, but I kinda for me personally, I really want people to, within reason of their own family systems and where they're at, to speak about this part of history and these narratives because it's so important. Like I feel like we're forgetting the fact that, Canada is our colonizer, that they deliberately attacked us, have a colonial agenda. And with the way the world's going, and their expansion projects is our people can't forget that no, they have at the end of the day, they are inherently colonial, violent, want the land for themselves and will do what they can to ultimately get rid of us.
Mhm. And if our people never defended themselves there and took up arms, then we wouldn't be here today. It's as simple as that.
Yeah. And that all like, I take that personally too, right? Especially when you hear Western historians talk or Canadians talk, it's like, no, like you literally, your state, like your people literally came to attack my people and try and kill us. Like I
Mm,
wouldn't be here today if, our ancestors didn't resist or if they didn't take the action they did that day. And again, not I always add like the caveat, like not romanticizing this history because it was violent, it was aggressive, it
mhm.
did disrupt. us as a people, even post 1885, because Canada did come down hard on us as a result, but it's still a big part of who we are as a people, as a nation, in terms of having these conversations around nationhood from the
Mhm.
indigenous perspective.
Yeah, and it's not too many generations in the past yet, right?
Yeah.
And our people are still defending themselves. We're still
Yeah.
being attacked, right? And like you
Yeah.
said there, and but the thing is too is that our uh, our younger generations, are learning different, and I've always considered of at first making a book, and I've been pressured
Mhm.
to make a book with all of this, and but at the same time, I was thinking, well, it's like our treaties, though. Like, who's really making books about that? Why don't we make books about that of what they
Yeah.
are? But it's not really who we are, though, right? Like, it's not who we are as people,
Mhm.
and that's where my mind is that
Mhm.
like if people want to learn, then they should come and see our people.
Yeah.
But as we see now moving forward, that there's fewer and fewer of our people that actually have this information. Like I have these books and these documents that I've printed out and I've handwritten and all this research that can give direction, and at some point even some of it looks like Indiana Jones's dad.
Yeah.
Having a little manuscript like that with
Mhm.
basically the instructions of how to get somewhere. But I'm the only one that can read this stuff. If somebody was to, if some reason I wasn't here tomorrow, who's gonna be left, right? And that's where my mind is at now. And I've been really thinking and having all of this stuff out on the desk here that maybe I do need to put it all together into a book, and be one of those out there that can actually have an impact in that kind of world, where it is needed, that we need to well, to share
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
history, be the
Exactly.
ones to steer it
Yeah.
for the future.
Yeah. I have that conversation with myself with radical narrative too, like some of the episodes and content. And I was debating too, like even this podcast, because I remember I reached out to you way before and I wanted out there, like our local narrative, grassroots narrative. But white people will listen to this, pretendians will listen to this, and within reason, we're having these conversations that are valid. But when we put stuff out there, people tend to either try and come up with like critiques or debunk or deconstruct what we're saying, and but I mean, I
Mhm.
I feel like just put it out there, see what happens. Because again, like this is like I feel probably one of the first conversations recorded about 1885 on Palmaker between 2 community members. That's gonna be out there online and technically
Mhm.
be a citable source. And yeah, pros and cons to it. I mean, and again, like I really want to emphasize that this is only, our local it's not only, but it is a localized perspective of what happened. And if people have their take on it or their perception of it, like speak about it. Like let people know that these narratives are out there, these anti-colonial narratives, these resistance narratives in terms of pushing back against what's being written about us. Yeah, because I know there's some localized historians too who wanna do episodes or have conversations about very unique histories, and I guess, like, this episode with you is kinda leaning into that conversation a bit more of putting things out there. Um, but yeah, it kinda has pros and cons to the conversation, and I think you should write a book. I remember your master's thesis, and you were talking to me about it and all this, and I was like, "Man, this should be a book."
I really triangulized my approach and my defense, though the actual defense, not the
Mhm,
paper, but I really wanted to kind of put a stranglehold and put Stone Child in the corner and the defense, and I knew I was going to have the opportunity to ask a question, right?
mm,
And in the end, when I got to narrowing my defense into to my question, I finally asked because I had a map. I hand drew a map on a whiteboard and everything. I brought all that stuff along and presented my defense, and I asked Stonechild. My one question was, did you ever set foot on Poundmaker Reserve at any point in your whole research? And you know what he said? He said no. I knew I had him right there. I was like, oh, if I could go like that in my defense, I had him. Boom.
Yeah.
I knew it. I didn't ask him at any point at our meetings through the project, and but I asked him in the defense, and I made him say in front of everybody, no.
Yeah.
So that's why geography is important, right? And knowing the land. It is an important part of the defense and for our people at that time, their knowledge of the land and their connection of the land. And one of our elders that's still around there, Walter Bonnet, he told a story of that we had songs. Then the warriors would all be lined up before they take a position into battle, and they'd be all smudged, and then an honor song would be sung for all of them before they go. And he said there was one that was sung at the time before the battle, and he said nowadays that song's used for other things, but he said that song though was specifically made for Poundmaker and his warriors as an honor song.
Mm,
Poundmaker has the chief and has a warrior song. So these are considered chiefs songs, right?
mm,
And then we sing them at the round dance when we uh when we have giveaway. But a lot of these songs and the history of them were captured songs.
mm,
And I didn't know until then when I heard him speak and sing this song that that was Chief Poundmaker's honor song that was sung at that time. And a lot of people too probably never heard that, and don't have the ability to really teach and really learn on the spot like the song or have heard it before or are able to recall that. So a lot of this I have to recall, I have to
yeah.
maintain, and I do use the written stuff. And but when it comes to that, it's not everybody can do it.
Yeah. It's valid. It's a valid take, and we're doing this work and living this experience in modernity, right? And while
Mhm.
navigating capitalism and all these contemporary conversations and struggles, but it's a big part of who we are. And I was gonna say too, like, it makes sense, like, people wouldn't correlate some of these songs or stories to this time because, yeah, there was a lot of nervousness after this battle, like, a lot of
Mhm.
people, even to certain extents, not using the names that they were commonly known as, switching narratives, saying they were elsewhere. Some families going into hiding, I heard some narratives around that. Um,
Mhm.
'Cause, yeah, Canada was pretty upset they lost this battle and ultimately made us pay for it in other ways.
Yeah, and that song. I wanted to go back to that song though. I'd sing it here, but again, they asked at that time that
Mhm.
it not be recorded. So,
Mm,
and I was able to share this places where I knew I wasn't being recorded though. How this song was described was that every part in that song, there's a lot of people that look at our music and the way we sing as just being noises that we make with our throat, but they're very sophisticated noises that
yeah.
are specific and purposeful, that
Mhm.
can describe things. The way we don't need words to be able to sing, because these songs connect to the land, and that's how Walter Bonnet describes that this song, how it was composed, is not a description of Poundmaker and his warriors. It's a description of the land here. All of these hills, you'll hear the description of the land on Poundmaker in this song and where his reserve is, and it's preserved in there. So you'll hear it when you sing it, and then you'll sing it. You sing it, and then I was like, oh, I was kind of blown away that's we sang that so many times, but it's like I never knew that was intended for Poundmaker. Some of those giveaway songs that we sing in round dance are came from captured, right? There's stories for those songs and how they originated. and we cause disputes sometimes when we sing those because one of them is Blackfoot, which was considered one of their flag songs, but we
Mm,
use it as a giveaway song here because that was a captured song that
mm,
we captured at a time. There's a story of how that was captured too, which is really mind blowing. But
okay.
a lot of these histories with song too
Yeah,
really merges into this history as Poundmaker people because Poundmaker himself was a good singer.
yeah.
Our great grandfather Yildirim Blanket was a good singer. Poundmaker's great grandfather was the original name holder, namesake of where he got his name as Poundmaker, the one that makes the buffalo pounds, right? But he was his Poundmaker's grandfather used to sit on a platform above the buffalo pounds, and he'd sing. And he had these calling songs that would call those buffalo, and they just walk into those pounds. So
Mhm.
you have all these historians that would say, like, oh, they had to stampede them and herd them and chase them down. But, at a time when we didn't have horses, what did we have to rely on? We had our spirituality, we had our beliefs, and we had our songs, and we had a connection to land and all of nature. And we're able to sing a song and bring in these buffalo. Right? We have these songs that could do so much that call things in, right? And that was just one of them. But that's who Poundmaker is named after. So even when they spell his name Pitekwan, they go like that, right? But it's Bitokahan.
Mm,
Bitokahan. Bitokahan is that buffalo pound, right? Bitokahan. Bitokahan Biwin. Yeah, that ween at the end is, that he's that person, that
I
man, yeah. Ween. And my dad was saying, like, nowadays when they have names, they're so different because they used to always be Wien at the end. And but now they're always Napo or Skoil,
yeah.
That was never a feature of our Cree names that were given in ceremony.
Mm,
They never had Skoil or, or Napo at the end.
yeah. Gendered. They became gendered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting stuff, man. And again, just asserting this record of who we are and where we're from our perspective and understanding. And we are in a time of where people are starting to rediscover these things, are going to work in these things. But I feel like I don't know, like I feel like everything becomes pan-indigenous or pan-narrative, general narratives, but they're more localized community narratives are vital in terms of who we are, like where our home fires are and how we live as a people is I feel like more important than these general takes or influencer or mainstream, things we're seeing take place. So this episode was definitely like asserting who we are and where we come from as a people here.
Mhm. I give you a lot of thanks too for giving me the opportunity here. My hopes are that a lot of our people, our young people from Poundmaker, are able to listen to this. It was always, I could only dream of being, invited to the school there. And I do it and give up, a day's pay and, my job to come out to Poundmaker to come and present to school there and, of all of this stuff. I did have an opportunity a few years back and out of all the presenting I do and speaking in these big crowds, like it's no problem to me. But when I actually showed up with my box of papers and everything like that, and it was to present in 5 minutes to our people, our
Mhm,
Palmaker band members, that was the most nervous I've ever been, especially in front of the elders too. Hey, like
mhm,
I felt like I was just gonna get shit when I presented.
mhm.
And it was just a thing inside me. I just thought I was just sweaty and everything. Like I never get like that, right? Like it was the hardest 5 minute presentation in my life to present Poundmaker material to Poundmaker people. So
And that's probably why Stone Child never came and did it.
yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, again, I kinda feel like we're just, being the tip of the spear with this conversation, and I welcome, people to to share what they want about this, or, reach out to us if they have any questions. And I guess that's my next question to you is how do people get a hold of you if they wanna talk to you, have conversations?
Oh, I respond to Facebook. Like I've had all kinds of people approach me through there, and yeah, I'll give my phone number through there if they want to talk. I'm open to conversation all the time. I'm never about withholding information. Like this isn't my story, right?
Yeah.
I did the research, and I was very privileged at the time to do it. Being paid, being funded by the band to go to school, and it was kind of my objective to that this was going to be my return to the community and doing this research. And it wasn't for me to benefit from, right? Like, yeah, I got a degree out of most of it, but again, it's the real benefit is for Poundmaker people and Poundmaker history. Yeah. And for people to learn who they are, and for people in Poundmaker to have pride in who they are.
Mhm,
It's not something that people should ever take lightly, when they say they're from Poundmaker. That
mhm,
this is because of who we are and where we come from and the history that we have. We're very strong people, and and our ancestors have always given us that spark, I guess, and what they did that day on May 2nd, to always be strong people on into the future. They lit that column of smoke, was not only for a beacon to alert our people on the reserve that the soldiers were coming, but they did it for the future.
yeah. Looking forward to what you're gonna do with it, with your work.
Yeah, I have all this stuff here. It's kind of crazy. It was all laid out here. All these papers here, like so much stuff that I have to put in the box, and I keep it stored, and all these notebooks too, like all the sources of and all the Dewey Decimal System of the libraries, where to find them. Like I have all that marked down here.
Yeah.
Like you should have seen the box I brought home from the university. It was like people can. I had 3 boxes actually of books,
Probably.
and I spent hours in special collections, and
Mm,
I just wish, like, at that time I had a phone to take pictures of the documents,
mhm.
not just complying with the 10% able to photocopy
Oh, yeah.
and then handwriting everything. Like, so, but I got a lot of photocopies and a mix of handwritten and stuff, and also our Muslim's biography. Like, check that out.
Yeah.
This signed
Beautiful.
copy.
Nice. Dude, I had one too, but it was in my house fire, man.
I got this for 50 cents at Rush Hill instead.
Dang, dang. Epic, epic.
Yeah. I was given this book by the Governor General's Foot Guards. It's Study the Buttons 2 by 2,
Uh-huh.
and it's a history of their account, the official account of the Governor General's Foot Guards of the Battle of Cut Knife Hill as well.
Dang, how long is it?
Um, this I don't know. It's the 400-page book, but there's a good section here on Poundmaker, and they wanted me to, because their unit was on a set course for reconciliation. When I went to Ottawa to visit them, they wanted to put me to task to redo and rewrite their historical account of the Battle of Cut Knife Hill. But I read it over, and I really like it because it's their account, right, of what they saw. It's
Yeah.
their own witnesses were there, took part, and this is what was reported. And I told them, I said, I don't want to do that,
Mm.
because I wanna preserve your account of it.
Yeah.
This is your account, and you can publish it because your people were there.
Yeah.
But I said, eventually we're gonna get to a point where our people are gonna be able to write about, or research, and put their research and their perspectives into mainstream. But this isn't really a publicly available book anyway. Too, it's just
Uh-huh.
like it's only their own publication, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah,
that
that
he's
makes
part
sense.
of the unit. So,
Yeah. I like that take because yeah, that's their story, and then we have ours, right?
mhm.
It's a nation vibe too, like, why would we incorporate our like
But I told him, but I welcome you. That I want to. I came here really to officially invite you to host your May 2nd ceremony at Poundmaker.
Mm,
We invite you there to be there in person. And since then, everything has been coming up though for them. They can really even
mhm,
come out to like the last that following year, that following May when I went there and invited them. The following May there, they had to go to the king's coronation.
okay.
They got called to they all had to go. They had to march and that and stuff as the
Yeah,
general's foot guards, and then,
probably on the TV and I didn't even notice. But
yeah, and then last year, something with their funding, they didn't get their funding or something like that. So I don't know, it's like but they keep trying to come.
mm. They're scared they're gonna get, jumped, surprise attack.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's legit, man. Yeah, good work. I really appreciate the work you're doing, and yeah, I feel it's vital. One of the things I've always thought that would be really cool is like when you give this on the ground account, like how you're explaining the geography, because like that's one of the main takeaways for this episode too. Is like the land has power, like know your land and territory, right?
Mhm,
Especially from like even a land-based defense or community organizing perspective. But I would love to see, like, a 3D animation, like, you kinda see them on historian movies, like, or
mhm,
history movies of how things are working and moving. Because yeah, it's like, I feel like if we had that image or even that loop of video that just showed these things, it would be really, like, valid that I think would really set the record straight in terms of what happened and how things happened that day.
it would be cool for somebody to retrace the exact path,
Mhm.
of the soldiers took to Poundmaker that day, but use a drone,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
take that footage of and, along the way, kinda piece
yeah,
it together, like, and then, that'd be good, just a cool visual.
yeah. Visualize it, bring it to life. Yeah,
Yeah,
valid.
uh,
Alright, well, thanks for your time, brother, I appreciate it, and, we'll be in touch.
yeah, yeah.
Oh, cool.
Alright, later.